Among psychiatric diseases, depression, in fact, is the most frequent. The prevalence is 15%. That means that over 100 people, 15 of them will develop a depression episode. And so this is much higher than the prevalence of other psychiatric diseases like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Because, in fact, the reasons for developing or being subject of depression episodes is linked to the environment, to the society. We know that for all these psychiatric diseases, there are biological causes, but are also societal causes. And this is really for depression that the, I would say, the relative weight of social events is the most important. And altogether, that means that if we consider the European population, presently there are only about 20 million of people who are depressed for a whole population of close to 400 million. As you know, this disease is associated with typical symptoms, as shown on the first slide. Of course, depressed mood, which is, I would say, the cardinal symptom, and so the incapacity or the loss of capacity to have some interest in pleasure in the life, and especially the drive, what we call the drive. That means to have the pleasure to do something. There are also marked alterations in sleep, and the sleep disorders are major in the case of depression, with especially the poor quality of sleep and with fatigue because of this poor quality of sleep, fatigue in the morning. There are also major cognitive alterations with poor capacity to concentrate, to have, new ideas and to be effective, to solve problems. And at the end, of course, what we know about depression is the risk of suicide. And it's really a major risk because we know that for the depressed people, the risk of committing suicide is 20 times higher than the risk for the general population. So it's a very painful disorder, not only, of course, for the depressed people, but also for the environment, for the family, for the professional environment, and so on. And it's also a lot of cost, very high cost for the society. So clearly, it's a major psychiatric disorders, and we have to take care of with a lot of care. It's very important. It's very important to take care of this disease. So, as I said, it's linked to stress events and to negative life events, and especially, so in the case, for instance, when you lose your job or when your partner is no more with you because of death and so on. These are these major negative events in life which can, in fact, which can trigger a depression episode. And so if you consider the stress, that means that we can go, in fact, to some biological considerations regarding depression. And I would just like to illustrate what we know currently about what is stress. Stress, of course, is an event which began at the brain level with this axis, which start in brain areas like the hippocampus and the hypothalamus, especially what we call here the PVN, the paraventricular nucleus. And so you have the events which trigger the activity of these brain areas, like the hippocampus. Then you have an activation at the hypothalamic level, which produce an activation of neurons, which trigger the release of peptides like CRH, corticoliberine, and arginine vasopressin, which will excite cells in the pituitary, so the third level here. And At this stage, because of this activation, you will have the release of ACTH, so adrenocorticotropic hormone in the blood, and which will act specifically on the adrenal gland and then trigger the production and the release of cortisol. And cortisol is the hormone of stress, and it will act on cells, on various tissues, on muscles, on fat, and so on, to allow the individual to produce energy to react efficiently against the stress events. That means to cope with stress. And of course, this system is a key biological mechanism to react positively against stress. And there is a defect in depression. And in fact, this control of the stress axis is lost for its most parts, I would say, with depression. And what is shown here, as soon as you have the production of cortisol, cortisol can went back to, in fact, can reach receptors, specific receptor at different levels. So at the pituitary level, in the hypothalamus, in the hippocampus, and will, in fact, trigger some break of the system to restore the normal situation. And in the case of depression, this control is lost. That means that there is a continuous production, excessive production of cortisol in blood, and cortisol is able to cross the blood-brain barrier and exerts some positive, but mainly negative effects in the brain. And these negative effects are notably a decreased connection, a decreased arborization of dendrites by neurons, decrease, as you can see on this slide, so a decreased possibilities of connections between neurons. And so altogether, this will produce what we call a decrease in the volume of the neural pile. And so as shown here with some brain areas which are more affected than others, and especially the hippocampus, you have a loss of neurons and also a loss of glial cells. That means that depression is not only associated with functional disorders, functional dysfunctions, I would say, in the brain, but also you have structural, anatomical alterations. So it's really a brain disease with major defects in the brain going on because of depression. So what we know about the drugs that we can use and the treatments to alleviate depression. In fact, these drugs are available since many years because they have been discovered about half a century ago. And we know that most of these drugs, in fact, act through a facilitation of the activity of some neurons and neurons which use monoamines as neurotransmitter. So 5-HT means serotonin and norepinephrine and DA dopamine. And in fact, all these drugs, by various mechanisms, as shown here, you have, so for instance, the blockade of catabolic enzymes like monoamine oxidase, and especially the isoform, monoamine oxidase A. The blockade, of course, of this catabolic enzyme will produce an increased levels of monoamines. You have also the other target, which is the reuptake for these monoamines. So if you block the reuptake, that means that you will increase the levels of monoamines available for the postsynaptic site, so to act on the receptor, and as indicated by the horizontal arrow. And you have another target, which consists of presynaptic receptors, which exert, in fact, a negative influence on the release and the production and the release of these monoamines. Altogether, because of the blockade of these various steps, you have an increased capacity of monoaminergic neurons to transmit the information from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic. You have facilitation of monoaminergic neurotransmission. And this, in fact, counteract what is known, and that, I mean, by direct exploration of the brain, you have some kind of decreased tone of the activity of monoaminergic neurons in the brain. So these drugs, in fact, are acting via different mechanisms. Of course, the first step is to mobilize monoamines, but the other effects, as shown here, it's some kind of overview of what is going on in the brain of depressed patients, as indicated on the left. As I said, we have evidence that, so in line with the positive effect of antidepressants on monoaminergic transmission, we have evidence for a decrease monoaminergic neurotransmission linked to depression episode. As I said, we have a facilitation of the stress axis because of the lost capacity, the lost capacity of negative control of the stress axis. But as you can see, in addition to these facts that I developed to some extent, we have evidence that you have some kind of neuroinflammatory reactions going in the brain of depressed patients with increased production of cytokines. You have also some change in other neurotransmitters, especially glutamate. You have evidence for a facilitation of glutamatergic neurotransmission. And linked to this, as mentioned already, we have this negative neuroplasticity in some brain areas, notably in the hippocampus, with so these decreased connections, decreased connectivity, decreased arborization of dendrites, and decreased possibility of contacts between neurons. And this is associated with the decreased production of trophic factors, growth factors, which are needed to promote neuroplasticity. So if we consider all these negative effects and associated with depression, the idea with antidepressants is to counteract these negative effects. So we know that these drugs already facilitate monoaminergic transmission. We know that there is a negative control on the pituitary adrenal axis because of the restoration of the capacity to have this negative control of the excessive activity of the stress axis. But the idea now is to try to develop drugs as antidepressants which would prevent these neuroinflammatory reactions by decreased production of cytokines, also to dampen the excessive glutamatergic neurotransmission. And via hippocampal neuroplasticity, growth factor, we know already the antidepressants that we have, which are available, these antidepressants improve hippocampal neuroplasticity, especially they develop, so you have more connections because there is an increased arborization of neurites. You have an increased neurogenesis in the hippocampus, and you have an increased production of trophic factor. That means that, of course, from the monoaminergic transmission to the last step, you have several of them at which probably it would be possible to act and to really alleviate a depression episode. So this is for the future. But presently, what can be done really is to identify better the depressed people who respond or do not respond to drugs via the genetic identification, looking at polymorphisms for specific genes, and notably it has been demonstrated that a few genes encoding for trophic factor, coding for also some targets of monoaminergic neurons like the 5-HT transporter. In fact, depending on the polymorphisms, you will have patients who react more or less to these drugs, and also the neuroimaging techniques which are currently developed, we can expect and we can hope that, in fact, thanks to these new developments, it will be possible to improve the efficacy of treatments because of a better identification of responders and non-responders. Thank you very much.